So, welcome everyone. We are absolutely thrilled to be here today. We are going to be talking about something that's brand new that we're introducing for this year in 2026. We're talking about unlocking the value of EdTech investments. So, I think this comes at a really great time. So, we'll be talking about the value of investment, the value of instruction. We'll also talk about return on investment, return on instruction, total cost of ownership. So all of those big buzzwords, all of that to say that the underlying message, the strategic influence, is really about telling the EdTech value story. So uh, I'm looking forward to our conversation. So let's do some quick introductions. Again, my name is Frankie Jackson. I'm a former K-12 CTO. I worked in that role, sitting at that head table of two districts as a CTO, one a district for 19 years. So I had time to really sit there for a long time and see the district come from T1 lines to high-speed fiber, and then at a very large district of about 120,000 students. I made a career transition in 2019, and I've been working at the state and national levels ever since, and have just really, I'd like to say, had some of the best career highlights ever. And so glad to be here working with COSIN on this project. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Of course. Maria Serapoulos, Director of Technology at Northbrook School District 28. We are a K-8 school district. I've spent most of my career in a K-8 environment with a few years at a high school level. And so transforming the technical environment, but also working parallel with the instructional side to further both paths for our students.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We've worked together on a couple of projects, and it's always a pleasure to spend any amount of time with you. How about you, Michael?
Hey, thank you. Yeah, Michael Flood. Been involved with COSIN for, I guess, close around 20 years now. I'm going back to time at Nextel Sprint and 12 years at Khajiit. Currently running a consultancy of my own. Spent 6 years on the COSIN board of directors, and it's been fantastic working with CTOs across the country and the COSIN community. You all as a community develop some of the most amazing resources, and we're going to see some of those today.
Wonderful. And then Will?
Hi, Will Brackett, Director of Technology in Oak Park Elementary School District 97, just right outside Chicago. We're also a K-8 district, and before that, I was in Burlington, Iowa at a K-12 district.
All right. I'd just like to say this before you leave the slide, is that while preparing this presentation and an 8-week module course about value of investment and the measuring of technology purchases from a return on investment and TCO, Maria and Michael and Will worked with me to help develop some case examples and to kind of oversee the content, if you will. Maria has supported the membership committee. She serves on that committee with COSIN, and then also the professional development, and then Michael in environmental sustainability. But I think it was actually more of strategic planning with sponsorships, and then Will with cybersecurity. So we pulled in the COSIN committees and had a representative from each of those committees work with us on this content. And I think that's worked out really well. And I'm thrilled that they were able to participate at different levels with our team. So thank you. Let's go ahead and get started. I think serving as a CTO for 25 years, when I think about all of the times that I went to the board podium, that's what we called it, the board podium, stepped up there to ask for thousands and sometimes millions of dollars worth of funding to sponsor an ed tech initiative, it was difficult. I went through 5 different bonds, the last one being almost $2 billion. So it was a very large purchase. That wasn't all of technology, but it had tentacles into every facet of technology. So I think we have to be very strategic in the way we ask for those funds, and I think it's getting harder. So I don't know if any of our participants would like to chime in. Why, you think this is a difficult subject matter. It sounds easy, but it's, when you're standing in front of board members and community members, and we're allocating funds to technology, uh, we have to tell the story. So does anyone have any story of when you stepped up to the board podium to ask for those funds, what your experience was just in a short amount of time? I can think of one case, and Michael, you and I worked on this. I've known Michael for years. That we have relationships all over the country. If you've been in this business long enough, Michael mentioned that he formerly worked with Khajiit, and we had a Khajiit initiative. Those were those take-home devices with internet hotspots connected to them, but it did all of the tracking on the back end. And I remember very clearly us working, trying to communicate that story about what that value was. And when we heard that students that were absent from school and could work from home, this was way before the pandemic days, it was enlightening to hear the success of these students academically. So I think being able to capture the value, capture the cost and the return is something that's extremely important to us as chief technology officers and ed tech leaders.
I'll add an interesting one, Frankie. Just
Okay.
also from those days. But Melissa Tevenkamp, who was CTO at Raytown Quality Schools at the time, together with her transportation director, they looked at the bus Wi-Fi use case, and
Yes.
when they did their full analysis, they actually found that their ROI was largely coming from reduction in disciplinary issues on the bus, and they basically tracked the time that was being spent dealing with those issues after the issue occurred, bringing students into the office, bringing parents in, having conferences, and just the paperwork and everything added up. So it was really looking at all the different components. Even though the primary goal was increased time for kids to work on homework, it was actually something else that ended up being a big part of the ROI. So
Isn't
interesting.
that isn't that always the case, that I think we have to be extremely creative when we analyze the data, and we'll be talking about that because there are a lot of different aspects, and sometimes there's some surprises when we really start talking about the value of technology. I think it's safe to say that the value doesn't speak for itself, and certainly when you ask for a large amount of funds, it's really the leader that is presenting, whether it be to the superintendent cabinet, to the superintendent, because we all know as a leader, you don't get to the board podium until you've done all of your homework and make certain that what you're presenting to the board of trustees, to the community, that you're asking for funds and you're asking for them in such a way that it shows what the true value is. Because you probably, if you have an astute board, certainly will get those kinds of questions anyway. So I think the message really is, the very first message is that it's really up to us as leaders to connect that investment to what the impact is going to be. We could say impact to student success, to teacher success, to the technology team, to the financial management team, all the different stakeholders. But we really have to look at the investment that we're asking, what we're going to spend, and tie that to student success, and then everything else that impacts student success, which are really a lot of different things. So I think this is what the problem is. We've kind of talked about it some, and that is that we're investing a lot of money in technology. Hopefully you are. Hopefully you're being successful at doing that. We've had money from the pandemic. We've had ESSER funds. But I think the expectations of how we're spending those funds for accountability certainly continue to rise as there's budget cuts and funding scrutiny, you might say. So the impact, I think, has been happening, but I think it's difficult to quantify. It was always difficult for me. Maybe it's been easy for you. When I say difficult, I mean crafting the right story, the right presentation to go forward to say this investment will really have an impact. So we as leaders in EdTech are asked to justify these decisions, sometimes without even a complete story. Maybe we may not, maybe it's somewhat of a stretch to get started as to how do you measure student confidence? How do you measure their level of collaboration skills? Sometimes you can't quantify, so it's really more qualitative. Have any of you on the panel seen any other kinds of problems that we might want to think about and discuss? Well, we'll get to some other things. Be thinking about it. Feel free to jump in if you think of anything. So I think what I think about is the emotional aspect of what we're really dealing with. We're dealing with the two most important things to our communities, and that is their money and their children. And so I can't think of anything that's any more controversial. So sometimes the value is felt, but it's not clearly understood. And so that's why a story is so important. It's got to be clear, and if the investment is being questioned, then I think these kinds of skills can make or break your level of success within school districts. And I think sometimes that comes as a little bit of a shock to EdTech leaders that I speak with all over the nation. Okay. So I think this does matter now, and I think this is a skill that we've heard from superintendents in our Empowering Superintendent initiative that COSIN has sponsored for several years. I think it's probably been going on for many years, and that is that the expectation is much higher for EdTech leaders. I guess it really doesn't matter what kind of leader you are. When you're asking for funding, we're expected to clearly define what the value is before we commit resources. So again, we mentioned scrutiny. There's increased scrutiny. It's a kind of a rob Peter to pay Paul. There's not an influx of funding, so often in school districts, you're taking money away so that you can fund other initiatives. So communities are asking for harder questions. What are we going to have to give up this year as we're putting our budget plans together? Sometimes I have to stop and think, what month is it? Well, we're going into April tomorrow. It's April 1st. So it's budget time. Budget draft proposals are being taken to the board. This is a big month for defining next year, which is, believe it or not, 2026, 2027. And the funding is shrinking. And so now I think, we've had the luxury of having some temporary funding. We've talked about that funding cliff that occurred with resources from the pandemic. But now we're looking for long-term value and value that has to be realized for a longer period of time. So there's higher stakes. There certainly are higher expectations, and the technology is changing. There's higher risk. There's a different set of questions. I never thought we would be questioning some of the things that we are as it relates to use AI or not, or how much screen time. 5 years ago, it was a different set of issues. So there's this incredible amount of pressure, and I think probably everybody on this webinar understands what those pressures are. So there's this shift, and I don't know that it's a major shift, but I think we've quantified it here in our communication that is really moving away from this traditional thinking to more of a leadership thinking. We've always focused, I think, on value. I think there's more attention about how to position ourselves and how to tell that story. So I think this is a nice kind of one shot graphic that really shows moving from IT owns the decision, maybe the technology management system, where it's now leadership is more involved, especially when it comes to cybersecurity and some of those other types of resources in AI that are kind of in the limelight. and I think we're moving in this leadership element of thinking to proactive decision making, and really thinking about not so much about what we, what do we spend and what do we plan to spend, but moving the language to what we're designing, what we're creating, what we're trying to achieve, in a way that I think tells a better story, and one that is more well defined. Does anybody on our panel have anything you'd like to say about this shift
Yeah.
that's occurred?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Just that, this slide is great. And I think it's the transition from, this is what I need, in your budget request to this is how I'm going to deliver what we want to deliver. So that explanation going from this is the financial resources I'm looking for, this is the money I need, to this is how I'm going to spend what needs to be spent to accomplish the goals we're trying to accomplish. Like when that conversation is happening, it makes it much easier, I think, for the whole cabinet and the leadership to understand why behind the investments.
Yeah. And, in all my years of hard knocks, you might say, it really comes down to, that impact. What is the impact if you don't have X, Y, Z? It's not like, a technology department sometimes can cut 10 to 15%. It's like, okay, what 10% can I cut? And this is what we're giving up. So this whole idea of impact analysis and justification, I think is stronger now than it ever has been. Anyone else from our panel have anything to add?
I would say that even like the efforts of this course, it helps further the leadership thinking for any CTO, any director. Because so often, if we look at the nature of how we evolve into our roles, whether it's instructional or whether it's technical, there are opportunities for growth in that leadership thinking and perhaps bringing other departments along in that process. Because all these, in the previous image, if you look at the traditional thinking versus the leadership thinking, that capacity needs to evolve over time. It's not going to happen overnight. So if we put that foundation in place and stick to it, all these can become a reality for any environment we work in.
Those are some really good points. You mentioned just in working on this course, and I find myself speaking somewhat of a different language. It's a reminder. It's not that we, the semantics that are used at a higher level, speaking from a language that really is analyzing cost at a higher level, I think helps. It helps with credibility, and I hate to use the term "get what you want." I had someone say, "Why do you always get what you want? You always go to the board and everybody gives you what you want." Well, it's intentional. You have to present your case with all the right information, so that the best decisions can be made. And you can't cry over spilled milk. If the funding isn't awarded, then you've done your very best, and it's not as if you got to change the story. You've got to collect the data and tell the story better next time. Will, how about you? Anything?
Yeah, it really goes to what, I keep harping on my staff and stuff, just is moving from a reactive to a proactive stance, looking forward, making sure that we clearly define that problem or the need that we're going to solve with this. And then, Mr. Quinn in the chat, I'm just kind of reading it. He's talking about devices and having to rush to one during the pandemic, and that was very reactive. And now we're coming to a world where now we have to look back and try to analyze that value. And this is a good lesson for us of that reactive time, because unfortunately the value at that time was to keep instruction going. That was it. And now what is the real value now we're back into a new normal, or the old normal, but with one-to-one for those school districts, other school districts that were already there. So and part of this return on investment is defining what is the need, define the data you need to gather later on down the road to evaluate, were you successful, and also did it meet the investment that you did.
Exactly. So it's not so much about a financial shift as it is just a leadership discipline, a leadership mindset, I think. Certainly has helped me. So let's just talk about a few definitions, and I, try to make it easy, primarily for myself, to be able to talk about it. And we've been talking about total cost of ownership for years and years. Those 25 years sitting at that CTO chair, I would always ask my staff to say it's not just the initial purchase, especially when you're going out for a bond, it's all of the other costs. So really looking at the cost way beyond the initial purchase, a 3 to 5 year cost. What is it not only going to cost to purchase from an acquisition perspective, but now, what kind of maintenance and support and training and downtime is going to occur. So it's really looking at everything that you can think of: training, staff education, down to, new types of jobs are being needed now. The one AI, for example, is, opening up a whole new realm of skills that are needed. So the whole market is changing. So this total cost of ownership, just to keep in the back of your mind, what is it going to cost me total over a 5-year period to really look at this purchase price? It's way beyond the initial price. And then the return on investment is there. First, I guess you have to decide if there is a financial return. So in other words, if we can avoid cost, avoid a breach of cybersecurity, avoid some sort of downtime, whether it be savings in staffing or consolidation or licensing. It's really trying to come up with that creativity as a leader to figure out what is going to be the return. And I think if we think hard enough about it, we can always find the details in whatever it is that we're proposing. The other strategy is to go back to the strategic partners, those that are putting together bid proposals, and ask them what is their return on investment. And maybe that's part of the purchasing evaluation matrix. Make it a little bit harder on our strategic partners to be able to deliver that kind of data. I think raising that expectation. And of course, efficiency gains. Sometimes that's the easiest to do is, for example, I don't want to name a particular product, but if a product can help save you to do faster scheduling, faster master scheduling. I came in 1994 where you had the little stickies on the worksheets, and it was a manual, whereas now it's completely automated. There's a huge time savings. I hear of cases all the time where there's efficiency gains. So, just sharpen your, I guess I'd like to say, just sharpen your skills on how you present things and how you speak, especially to those that are in charge of the money and making decisions. And then
I wanted to add one thing there, Frankie. Just although it's less common, sometimes one of the components there is actually the ability to bring in additional revenue. And most of our operational things that we deal with in the technology world, that's not really, what it's about. But in some cases, we may be involved in working with platforms where better capturing data allows you to get reimbursement for things that you wouldn't have gotten reimbursement for before. So we think about that with a National School Lunch Program or Medicare reimbursement or, other types of things like that. It may be something that, it has the potential to lead to an improvement in enrollment numbers or staving off a decline in enrollment numbers. And so enrollment directly translates into revenue. So that's also a component of ROI where if there's an opportunity to increase revenue for the district, that can pay for it, or securing a grant. I think we'll have an example later on where we'll come back to securing a grant as an example.
Yep, absolutely.
And Michael, just that kind of hits me, and that is, let's say you increase to that National Lunch Program, you do breakfast now, and you hire another staff member. In small communities, another job in a small community is also probably something we overlook on a value investment. Maybe not to exactly the school, but definitely to the community that school services.
Oh, yeah, good. Really good
transition to the value slide too. Frankie's going to next. Yeah.
I'd love to talk about value of investment, but there's a lot of things that we could add to this. But from a leadership perspective, I think it's really about what value are we bringing. I'm hearing of districts. Of course, I'm from the Texas. I'm outside of Houston, but there are districts that are dissolving technology departments, and especially in instruction. And I just think that's, I mean, I have to ask myself, are we really doing a good job at communicating what that value is? So you have to ask yourself, what kind of, always think about what kind of value am I intentionally creating, and am I paying for myself? I mean, you hate to bring it to that level to say, is the effort that I put forth in leadership and what I'm cultivating, am I worth the money? It's a lot more than that. It's instructional impact. How much more time are you able, especially in technology, creating for teaching? The most popular, I think, is student outcomes. But again, sometimes that's hard to quantify. So you have to go into the qualitative realm, but then still somehow wrap around it a dollar figure. I think operational efficiency is easy to measure. With fewer tickets, faster workflows. But sometimes that's a misnomer too. You have to be really creative, because fewer tickets could be that, more tickets could be a sign of productivity, whereas fewer tickets is we're not experiencing problems because we're being more proactive. Therefore, there's not more tickets. A lot of districts look at the number of tickets that are created. So I think you've got to have a full understanding about what you're really considering value. Risk reduction, of course, and then equity, access for all students, and that's kind of a political landmine right now too. Anyone have anything else to add to that is interesting to you, or that you've had some experience dealing with?
One of the ones that we had a project that we were involved in, involved increasing access to actual courses. So, we looked at a district. I don't want to name the district, but we looked at a district, and they were looking at college readiness and career readiness. And one of the things they looked at was AP access, and they found that out of all of their high schools, there was one that had access to a slew of APs. And there was one other that had a few APs. And then there were basically the rest of them, which was about 70% of their high schools, had no APs. And they said, well, the parents haven't been asking for APs. And it's because the parents didn't really know what an AP was in those communities. And so they leveraged technology in a way to increase access to AP courses across all of their high schools. And so that was a cost, but the return, the value was, students now had access to opportunities and to higher tier courses that they'd never had access to before, which opened up new pathways for them, which in the long run was very important for the community and the district's strategic plan.
Very interesting. And then I think, in my experience, maybe just in my experience, but I don't know that we do a great job at tracking where students go and what they do. So what was the end result? How much college funding did we save the parent? How much more of an education of higher level degrees were they able to pursue? What certifications did they get to help them work their way through college? I know I worked my way through college, and certifications, we didn't really have that back then, but so I'm working with some individuals where the certification has really helped, because they're able to work. They have a valuable way of earning money so that they can afford to continue to go to education. So somehow I think, what I hope comes out of this is this whole conversation about how we can do more of capturing this value of investment, especially on the qualitative side. So here's the big idea. TCO is what's it going to cost? ROI is what do we expect financially? And then VOI is what is the value? What value are we creating? And then, keeping all of those in mind, I think helps you as the leader put your presentation together. Doesn't matter what you're buying, devices, professional development, network electronics, software information systems. I mean, you could come up with any kind of scenario for any of these. All right, we're going to continue on. So we've talked a little bit about these three, but then I think the next thing to really think about is, how does this align with your district priorities, with your strategic plan. Uh, and when I think about any time that any of us, but I'm going to speak for myself, has asked for any kind of an investment, you have to align it and tie it to the district improvement plan. Otherwise, how are you expected to complete the goals that are outlined, that have gone before the Board of Trustees to the community, if there is a funding associated with it? And that funding might not be $1, it could be in salaries, but that equates to dollars. So really thinking about putting all of your story together, but thinking about, these are the district priorities. I'm not asking for anything outside of what is not a priority for our district. And you can always find a hook somewhere. I've heard other Edtech leaders say, well, I'm not really in the district improvement plan. I guarantee you that you're in that district improvement plan, because it's kind of like the keys to your car. You're not going anywhere unless you have access to technology. And then again, how do you know that it's working? And then how are you going to communicate it? So this is an easy slide. This is something that I think we can all do, and we can all do better than what we're doing now. So this, in my mind, and us that are working together, really exploring this, is that, the data's there. There's a lot of logs. There's logs of uptime. There's logs of access, who's accessing what they're doing, how much screen time there is. But this gap is really going from, here's all the data, telling that story of the impact, and then making that decision. So sometimes there's a breakdown there. So the data doesn't tell the story. It's really your job as the leader to tell that story. And who doesn't love a good story? Just think about what we have here as members of COSIN. And if you're not a member, hopefully, you'll join. But it really is the only association that is really focused on EdTech leadership in the community, of trying to enhance that. We have the expertise right here. And that's really what we've assembled here. So when I look at cybersecurity, I think of Will. When I think about sponsors and strategic planning, I think of Michael. We have someone working, and a lot of people working on the committee, that are part of these groups. So you too, that are in the audience, and as we move forward in the future, can contribute to this body of knowledge. Maria works in membership. She also kind of crosses over in professional development. So all of these working together, I think pulling the expertise together, making this better, creating better stories, better examples, templates, I think will help us do a better job as we move forward in this field. What else can we say? Anybody have anything else? All right. It's really, those of us, probably most of us are CETLs. There's many of us that are CETLs. And there's some complex skills. There's those 10 essential skills in the framework. And I think one skill that I think is worthwhile, and certainly one that we could expand upon, is taking something extremely complex and moving it into this state of clarity, is being able to translate that better. And I know I'm working on that, and sometimes that's hard to do. So really taking that, putting it all together with all the different resources that you have, connecting that value, and then coming up with better decisions and getting the answer that you want, which is yes. So if anyone that's on this webinar can do this and do this really well, we would love to have you join us. We're going to be at the COSIN conference. We have a session on, I think it's that Tuesday. So hopefully we'll have time to work together and be face-to-face and really talk about how we could increase this skill, especially for our CETLs. A whole nother topic we could do a webinar on is, really looking at measuring what matters. That is, what is really going to drive results, And is a result something tangible that we can quantify? We've talked about qualitative versus quantity, in really putting those things together. So comparative metrics, doing maybe better at benchmarking. I think that's what, when we come together and work together, we're able to do a better job at comparing and benchmarking with one another, doing better analysis, and really looking at what the impact of learning is. Part of any grant is really looking at what impact, what result are you going to bring to your district if you're giving this additional funding in a grant. So up front, coming up with what you're going to measure and how you're going to translate that into value or return on investment, I think is key. I'm always looking for somebody that does that really, really well. Of those that are on the panel, do you feel that you do that well? And what has worked for you when you're really getting down, sitting at your desk with your the leadership teams that you work with? What are you measuring? Does anybody have anything to add to that?
We're actually working on that from the lens of AI tools and adoption. I don't know that we have the full output. We have an idea of where we want to be with it, but waiting for some state legislature to further refine that for us. But we just did that this morning with a tool, right? And I had to push back a little bit politely, but getting back to what is our investment here? What are we agreeing upon that we're going to hold each other accountable for? And it does sometimes make for that uncomfortable conversation, but that's where we put the human element, remind each other. We said we're going to keep ourselves to these standards. We're going to bring those questions back up. And is it really meeting our goals that we're planning on investing with our students for critical thinking and aligning back to our strategic plan, as you've mentioned throughout the slides, Frankie? And asking the question, does this really matter? Does this really fit what we're doing here? So that's in its stages right now, progressing for that story to be told. But in the back end, it looks a little messy, but we got to hold ourselves accountable to get to the point of what is our investment specifically on that topic or that tool that we're referencing today.
Yeah, because it is expensive. And there's a lot of issues and a lot of the technologies, when it really comes to measuring that value and upfront working on what's really going to drive those results. So thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking, maybe you can quantify that and do all of this work and then bring that back to us, especially in the area of AI.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll speak real quick. And really sometimes I think the trick or the work comes into figuring out what to measure and what accurately is going to tell the story of your actions. But we here at Oak Park decided at one point that we were going to we have 10 buildings, so we were going to put private fiber in between all of our buildings that we own. And the ROI on that from doing E-rate lease lines is like 15 years or more. But with the lease lines, we were limited to no redundancy. Whereas if we built our own system, we can build in redundancy. And that's where our value came in. And what we measured was the amount of instructional minutes that were down to network outage, because we had 10, 15 years of how many minutes we lose before the new system was put in. And then our expectation was that because we had redundant links, that we would drop that down to a significantly less amount of digital instruction minutes lost due to network failure. And that's the measurement we continue to look at. So
yeah, I think that's a popular one, measuring downtime and the impact on instruction. I love it when you can get your arms around an equation and calculate that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So this is a story framework. It's a planning tool. What are we going to invest in? Why does it matter? And here's some little tricks. This is easy. Be really specific, tie it to your goals. What are you expecting to change? We've talked about a lot of different ideas. How are you going to measure that impact? And then what will this enable next? What is our vision? What do we want to be? Where are we going in the future? The other thing is, your story may change depending on what your audience is. You've got different stakeholders, they hear a different type of value. So, if you're presenting to finance, it's all going to be about money. If you're presenting to end users, it's all going to be about the experience, the student. Stakeholders might be, what is your strategy? What's going to be the return? And then technology, usually it's all about, we want to do the latest and greatest thing. We want to be innovative. So, you've really got to think about who your audience is. If you're talking about funding, it may be that you've got different levels of approvals before you get to that board podium and get that answer of yes to move forward and get those funding that's really required. So it's just something to think about. Here's some mistakes, and this is me. I mean, I'm a software engineer at heart. So I think everyone wants to see all this, data and it's not to show how smart I think I am, but just to know that I do my homework. But that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for something that's easy. We're looking for very clear instruction. A good way to communicate that everyone can understand. Of course, it may be different based on your audience. We have developed a new course. There's 8 modules. In Module 2, we've spent some time really trying to gather some really good stories. So this is really a hyperlink. If we share these slides, you can see that there's really a Google document behind it. I want to make sure that we have time. We can always come back to it. But this is an example of a cybersecurity value investment. So that is that, conducting an assessment of your cybersecurity posture can lead to insurance savings, can lead to reduced downtime, could also quantify some productivity gains, and also be an indicator that could be used as we apply for grants and for different funding resources. So we go through in the course and really have tried really hard to provide some templates, to provide some cases that would get to this slide, to get to this is our net value of investment. So in other words, we had to spend a little bit of money to make some money, to do, you had to pay to the resources to get a very detailed assessment and a strategic plan that would help improve the cybersecurity practice and posture. But in the end, there was a value savings simply because insurance premiums were reduced. So this is just one example. We won't go into the exact example unless we have time at the end. Here's another one of membership value of investment success, where we really looking at the membership of COSIN, because that was near and dear to our hearts. We're presenting this information. I think, Maria, you worked on this one. You may want to say a few words about this one.
Absolutely. And this slide is also linked when you get to the presentation with some examples. But the membership, and more than ever, this is like the first year in God knows how many years that I have found more and more benefits from our COSIN membership. And that's not just for myself, because you can have multiple members within your organization. There was something dropped in the chat earlier for also superintendents have resources. But as you can see, just even from the listed out items on here, the trusted benchmarks, professional development, peer collaboration. And with that also comes most or many states also have a state chapter, which further extends the opportunities for local professional learning and local collaborative peer collaboration, whether it's through COSIN's listserv, your state's listserv, however that is handled. Again, the return of investment, there's no extra fee for any of these items or most of these items. And then you've got the governance and risk readiness. along with grant and funding readiness. The value that's listed there is an example based on a district that pays $500 per year over a 3-year period. But as we mentioned, there are 2 case examples, or 1 or 2 case examples linked to this slide also, where you can compare that value for your district. We are a small district. To be able to not only get resources for professional development for myself, but my team, who maybe I can't send out, but they can do some virtually, or individuals who want to grow in their role that maybe want to become a director or CTO. This allows for some avenues as they look to maybe prepare for their CETL. I actually have somebody here who is looking for those resources. So one membership, and you can encompass all these bodies within your organization and all these expertise and all the resources that we've shared in the previous slides.
What you might do, any of you that have access, is just drop those links. I think everyone has view access for these 2, so that you could look at the details behind it. If we have time, we can review it and ask some questions. So if you have access to these slides, you can see there's the link. Probably should have put a QR code. We can do that in the future to actually see the actual compilation of how we derived this. And here's the key. If you're the leader, and there could be some subjectivity into it, but you're the one presenting, if you can defend it, if you can quantify it and show it, it's your story. You can, I don't want to say twist the data for it to tell that story in the way that works best for you. Certainly you would want to be 100% authentic and honest, but I think there is some real strategy in how you prepare the story. And I think those are the EdTech leaders that are highly successful, that can tell that story well. So if we can't, this is what I think about myself. If I can't define the value before I ask for an investment, then I'm going to possibly find myself in a position where I'm not going to be able to explain it, and I'm not going to feel good about the work. And I think you want to be able to justify the investment. And so that when you go forward and ask for that investment, you feel completely committed that you're doing the right thing for your school district or for your school agency. So you've got to be able to define it very clearly. Otherwise, you're not ready to ask. You're not ready to go to the board podium or to the superintendent and ask, because you're going to get attacked. You're going to get scrutinized for your purchase if they ask questions that you can't answer. So here's the call to action, you might say, is that, start small. Any kind of request, even if you're not going to the board podium, let's say you're just going to the next level up. Think about these terms and how you could reposition your ask, if you will. I call that CYA, cover your ask, to start small and then work to scale. Certainly align it and make it simple and be able to communicate it to the very best of your ability. And I think it really is a leadership discipline. You can train those that you work with, even if they're not in your department, to ask these kinds of questions. You can be the role model for that. And you can explore this learning journey with COSIN. And I'll show you what we're talking about. We've got an upcoming conference session, and it is that Wednesday. It's early in the morning. So this is the name of it. I'll be presenting with Diane Dorsch. She is a former chair of COSIN. So we have a lot of fun together. We'll make it fun. I think, Maria, you'll be there, and Michael and some of the others that have served. So hopefully this will be a productive session where we can get some face-to-face time. We'll be giving a presentation very similar to this, but hopefully we'll be able to work and develop some really creative stories and really put forth some effort to do a really good job. We're also doing a 3-part workshop. We're doing that on May 7th, 14th, and the 21st. And it's only going to be an hour. It's going to be on Thursdays. It's Eastern time. And so this would give us time to offer our membership the ability to say, look, I've got a purchase that I'm trying to get approved. And maybe you're working on a bond. in Texas, it's a May or a November initiative, and you've got to back up before then. Maybe it is you have something very specific that you're working on. You can bring that to the workshop. We can work through it together. Depending on how many are in the workshop, you can hear their ideas about what they're doing, ask questions, and we'll work through the 8 modules at a high level. And then we will hopefully be able to produce some real case studies that we can all learn from one another to do a better job at really looking at the price tag of technology and be able to share those stories. We also have this course. It's completely done. There is 8 modules. We haven't really introduced when we will offer this course. We thought we would do this webinar, we would do the COSIN session, and then we would do the workshop in May, and then we would rethink our overall strategy. You're the first really to hear about this, so I appreciate you being here. We appreciate you being here. We'll come up with when we can roll this out as a formal course, and then continue to add knowledge to this body of knowledge. These are the 8 modules. So we've got an introduction, we've got some case examples that we actually go through and work through. We do some cost modeling. We look at direct cost, indirect. We look at really what it's going to take to make that case. What are the components that are going to be needed to make that case to leadership? And what you're working on is different than what another district, another school agency, and another part of the nation might be working on. But I guarantee you there's something that you can learn from them. We just wrapped up a project management course today offered through COSIN. Everybody's project was different, but all coming together in an 8-week course really brought everything together. It was actually 7 weeks. You become friends. We all have a lot in common. We work in the same business, learn from one another. We also go into planning and budgeting and really looking at the overall life cycle, focused on, as many measurements as we can find, and then create your own case study, because, we don't want learning to be something separate that you go do. We want it to be something that you can walk away with that contributes to what you're already working on. In Texas, we call that kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So in other words, whatever I'm working on, I've actually got a project that I need to build anyway. I might as well build it in collaboration with others and with other experts in the area that might help me do a better job. So that's the course. And I think we're pretty much at the end of our session. We've got the COSIN calendar, so you can sign up for the workshop. We've got the year-round catalog, so that you can plan your professional learning. And we really hope that's why you're here. That's why you've attended this webinar, and we can't thank you enough for being here. We'd love to hear your ideas. We got a few minutes, so that's really all that we have. So with that, I suppose we can take some questions, really have some conversation. We've got a few minutes left.
Well, Frankie, I was just going to add that, when you look at everything that we talked about in the past hour, a lot of it really overlaps, right? So when you're thinking about when you're first scoping out what it is you're doing in a project, who are those different stakeholders? They may have different benefits, which means what operations wants to see out of it, that maybe time or cost savings may be different from what instruction wants to see out of it, which is academic results, or what even parents want to see out of it, which may be making their lives simpler, or, better communication, or, all of those things. So different stakeholders have different benefits, which then translates into what you want to measure for those different groups, so that you can then present a message that's different for those different audiences. And those all go together. But,
Really
one of those projects that hits it out of the park, you kind of dream ahead of time. What do I want to be able to say to each of these constituencies a year from now to show that this was successful? And that helps you kind of pull all that together. And then hearing, those similar stories from your peer districts and from your peer leaders around the country through the COSIN network, the more you hear those examples, the more it gets you in that mode of thinking, right? And then just practice makes perfect with this sort of thing.
I really appreciate your comments because I agree 100%. You know, my mother used to always say, "Misery loves company," and that's not. You know, we all like to know that we're all in the same boat.
That's why there's so many education conferences. No.
They're all working on the same set of problems, and I think that's one of the exciting things about being part of a community and to participate, because you don't want to work in an island all by yourself, and it's more fun when you're working with other people that have the same interest as you. So I'd like to say thank you very much for attending, and if there's anything else that we want to discuss, we certainly can. Anything else, guys?
I think
No,
Michael summarized it really nicely there. And going back to what our values are, and I think I just cut you off, Will. I'm sorry. Let's add one more thought in there.
no, I just was to say that I asked if there was any questions in the chat. The chat's clean, so we're not leaving anybody hung up.
Okay.
We'll
I
see
really hope.
everybody at COSIN.
Yes, definitely. Hope
Yes,
to
see you
see
in
you.
Chicago.
Yes.
Come on over.
Exactly. All right. I'll pause the recording.